looks like we are officially being live streamed. I'm going to call the meeting to order. I'd like to first establish that we have a quorum for this meeting, beginning with a roll call vote. Joe?
Here.
Jen?
Here.
Yana?
Here.
Christina?
Here.
Nicole?
Here.
And I am here. We officially have a quorum. Jen, has this meeting been properly noticed?
It has.
Okay. Hang on, I just ended up in. Sorry, okay, there we go. Before we move on, I just wanted to thank everyone for their flexibility with meeting format. The shift to virtual was, a practical and necessary step to ensure that we had a quorum for board members who were able to attend the meeting, since without a quorum, we wouldn't be able to hold a meeting at all. So this, the alternative to a virtual meeting versus a rescheduled one, in light of the length of time since our last meeting, we wanted to continue to move forward with the important items on the agenda without delay. And so moving to a virtual format was just a necessary practical step rather than a preferential one. And I do think it's important to mention that. And I also look forward to seeing you all in person on the 24th. So to help ensure that we're centering our work around our shared values in serving our students, we begin each of our board meetings by reading our district's equity and mission statements. Christina, would you read those tonight?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to start with the mission statement. Each student will acquire the knowledge and skills necessary to achieve their personal goals, thrive in a global society, and lead a healthy, self-fulfilling life. And then I'm going to read the equity statement in both Spanish and English. Cada estudiante tiene acceso a los recursos y al rigor educativo que necesita en el momento adecuado de su educación, independientemente de su raza, género, etnia, capacidad, idioma, antecedentes familiares o ingresos familiares. Each student has access to the resources and educational rigor they need at the right moment in their education, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, ability, language, family background, or family income.
Thank you, Christina. I appreciate you reading that in both English and Spanish. I'm always impressed by dual language abilities. Are there any questions or comments on the remainder of the agenda from the board? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
That's a motion from Yana. And
Sure.
is there a second?
I'll second, Jen.
And a second from Jen. All in favor signify with aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Tonight's agenda has been adopted. I'm
Aye.
going to now turn it over to Dr. Clarity for student recognition.
Good evening, everyone. And again, I want to reiterate our board president Emeritus stance, and we sure appreciate the flexibility today. I think while we definitely want to be in person, we wanted to maintain quorum to be able to do valuable business today. The thing I'll miss most about today's opportunity is our next piece, which is student recognition. We love the opportunity to have our students in front of us in person to express our sincere gratitude for all their work, not just in our buildings, but in their presence in the community as well. We have some tremendous representation today in the form of our students that represent the Battle of the Books. And I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Teresa Voss to kind of give you an explanation of what that is and what that entails, and also extend a tremendous amount of gratitude to her and her leadership in leading this fine group of students in their representation of VSD and everything that they bring to our community. So without further ado, Mrs. Voss.
Hello, all. Just a sincere thank you for inviting us in. We have students both that are watching the live version, as well as our other coach, which is Ms. Christensen. So we have some students at home that we just want to greet as first. And then I'm going to let my 5 students who are here at school say a quick hello. So you're gonna have to be nice and loud.
Hi, I'm Lily Fry.
I'm Liam Lawler.
Hi, I'm Alexi. Hello, my name is Marion.
So this fine group of students, we have sophomores and juniors here tonight. And some of them have been in Battle for 3 years and some this is their first year. So what Battle of the Books really is an opportunity for our kids to connect around reading. They have an opportunity to either be a competitive person or just kind of a recreational reader. And we do a lot of ways just to engage students around what they're reading and opening up their, opportunities to read more diverse texts. So that's what our group is. We've put together a little video that is on, I think Meredith, you have access to it. It should be linked at the bottom, where our kids' voices kind of tried to explain Battle a little bit more.
Hi, I'm Liam. I'm a junior this year, and I'm a competing member in Battle of the Books. I joined Battle of the Books because I love reading books, and my favorite part is the whole vibe and the fun activities that we do during the club.
Hi, my name is Malatsium, and I am a sophomore here at Verona Area High School. I just wanted to say I really appreciate the community here. It's so nice, and it feels good to just have a bunch of people together who love books, who are willing to talk about books and share their experiences with books and their favorites. It's just so cool. I love this club.
Hi, I'm Meitri Patel. I'm a sophomore at Verona Area High School, and I am part of the Battle of the Books Club. It's a really great experience being at this club. I love the atmosphere, the people, and it's open for all. You can meet new people here, read books, and just enjoy with other people and talk about similar interests. I love the open community and how everybody can do something here and have fun, no matter what level they're at and no matter what type of book they love.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Semen. I'm a senior. I've been in Battle of the Books since I was a freshman. I joined because my friends are doing it, and I've just loved the community and the fun activities we do. We do cookie decorating, and everything just relates back to books, and I just love the community about the club.
Hi, I'm Claire Ludico. I'm a senior this year, and I've been doing Battle for the last 4 years, so I joined my freshman year. And the reason that I joined Battle in the first place is I've been reading my whole life. It's a huge hobby of mine, and I love this club because it gives you a space to just talk about stuff that you like. I get to talk about the books that I like with the people that I like, and we do really fun activities, and it just fuels my love for reading.
My name is Leora, and I'm a junior. I joined Battle because I really love reading, and it exposed me to new genres and books that I wouldn't have read before, and it showed me other things that are really cool to read that I wouldn't have picked up on my own.
So as you can see, we have a wonderful group of students who I have to say that Ms. Christensen and I are blessed that we get to spend time with them, every other week. And they've been in here for multiple years, and they are always bringing in new students. So this is Battle of the Books. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. This is fascinating. This is Meredith, and I just wanted to say you might have some board members crashing at your next few meetings. This looks incredibly fun, and I'm dying to know what books you've been reading and what books you've read in the past. But this is amazing.
I also would love to know what book list y'all have compiled, because I think that would be so wonderful. And just kudos to all of you for reading books during your normal coursework and then joining a club to read books. I think it's fantastic. I've recently just started reading books again and taking time away from my 2 little kids to read because I love it so much. And I love seeing you all there for so many different reasons. So awesome, awesome club. Thank you for joining.
Yay, good for you guys. We'll share that list with you. We got that. So
Always looking for good recommendations. So it sounds like this is the place to come. Thank you so much to all of the club members for being here tonight and for sharing information about this. And just, I hope you continue to enjoy each other and your friendship and your shared love of books. That is fascinating and really, really fun.
Absolutely. I just really wanted to quickly say, as I listened to the testimonials, the themes that consistently stood out were the joy of reading, the community, and the collaboration. And that's everything that you can ask for when you're talking about developing critical thinkers and a world-class students that are going to enter the most diverse global society ever. To have those tools to be able to take, you're on a tremendous path to success. And we want to thank you, Mrs. Voss, for setting that the structure, and thank you, our students, for continuing to advocate and push for reading and reading skills. I did cram read, not that I'm doing a commercial for it. I did cram read the new Will Smith book this weekend, and it's phenomenal. So
I've been reading that too. It really is good.
it is phenomenal.
Oprah said it was her favorite book she's ever read as part of a book club. So
It's really good.
oh.
I am putting a disclaimer on there around any languages in there. It's not so, but it is a good book.
I just want to say the same kudos to all the students, and my favorite part of the new high school building is the library. I will not back down from that because it's so gorgeous. So I hope you've gotten some time in that new library space, and certainly the content's more important than the surroundings, but the library to me is such an inspirational spot in that building. So hope you enjoy reading there.
Mrs. Voss, we're not able to present it to you in public, but we'll be happy to drop by one of your clubs and present your certificate of appreciation on behalf of the Board of Education. We want to present that to you and your students for you to hang proudly in our state-of-the-art library. So we look forward to bringing that over to you as soon as possible. But thank you again, and thank you all your students for joining us today.
thank you.
Well, Dr. Clarity, it's always a tough act to follow when we have our students at our meeting. So
No.
with that caveat, I'm going to hand it over to you for our superintendent updates. But that was it's really great to see the different activities that are going on with our students and how engaged they are. I love that. So, okay, for the superintendent report, I'm turning it over to you.
All right, thank you. We need to consider adjusting the agenda so I don't always have to go back to the students, but I'll take that on for right now. And again, my apologies in advance to everyone that's here and those that are watching live stream, though. You're going to have to consistently hear us say advance the slides as we're trying to work through the technology. We have one person running the slides, so please excuse that in advance. Well, for now, if you can advance to the first one, please. All right, so VSD, in adherence with our policies and our heartfelt desire to be collaborative with our staff and gain feedback, administered a very short but meaningful staff survey where we really wanted to get to the root of employee health and well-being, and then develop some action steps of how we should move forward as an organization. As we think about the inverted pyramid or the inverted leadership chart, where we are really leveraging staff and student voice to understand our moves, this was a critical step for that. So some of the things that we have already presented to our staff, and we gave them these results already, but wanted to provide to our full community are the common themes that resonated from our employees. First, thank you so much for the very high turnout. We have 467 out of 800, which in survey world is a pretty high return rate, and shows that our staff do want to participate and provide feedback. So here's how it breaks down. things that are initiatives or activities that support your role as an educator. Things that really came to the top were more time for teaming and collaboration, especially around job-specific curriculum and professional development. Overall, less meetings. And I think when we talk about less meetings, it ties into the first one, whereas I think is maybe not be the overall volume of meetings, but meetings that are meaningful to what they asked for, what our staff asked for in the first one. Just those meetings that are more collaborative in nature and allow for peer-to-peer interaction. More communication from leaders. We strive, again, wrapped in policy, to have strong communication from our leaders at central office and as well from at our building level leadership, and making sure that they consistently are hearing their voice and is true, authentic two-way communication. And then finally, the final two, as we've seen especially during the COVID-19, has really been a challenge, is the filling of absences and vacancies. We know that we'll get to some data later on about our sub-fill rate. We've provided some additional strategies as recently as last week to try to support the staff absences or sub-fill rates, but we know we have some work to do in those areas. And finally, I continue to work around student behaviors. We know that when students feel a strong sense of belonging, they're far less likely to misbehave. So we want to think about how do we build those structures where all students feel involved and part of our school community, and strengthen our structures there. The strategies that support the role as an educator. We really received significant feedback about allowing general leave to be used for mental health. As we think about physical health, it's a norm in society. If you have a physical health need, you put it in and you're supporting that area. I think all societal-wise and organizations, especially VSD, can continue to strengthen our understanding of mental health as being just as important as physical health, and what that means in supporting our staff. And how do we use our calendar to look at district-wide mental health days. And then finally, I'm just going to name it, the salary structures or salaries overall for educators and what they really mean to so as a nation. And this is again a national trend. We have to do better in supporting our staff in terms of the salaries that they deserve and earn. They work night and day in support of our students, and we really want to compensate them accordingly as much as possible. We understand that there's budgetary restrictions, but we do value and understand the need for salaries. Next slide, please.
Dr. Clarity, can I ask a couple questions on that previous slide?
Sure.
Oh, this is related to the staff survey. Sorry, I'll wait till after this one.
Not a problem. Not a problem. So it'd be disingenuous to have a staff survey and put themes out there without action steps. And so we want to provide the action steps that we can think about in the immediacy, knowing that this is a long-term goal. I want to publicly state this: we at VSD are not just thinking about, how can you quickly fix a quote unquote problem. We are truly invested in improving the quality of life of educators in general, and making sure that their quality of life as a VSD educator is strong, sustainable, and that you feel value within this organization. So with that, some of the things that we are looking at are acknowledging mental health time and how we can use that under the general leave, adding a mental health option to Skyward. We're also looking at building our master schedules in a way that are more supportive of common planning time, so that collaboration structure that our staff is striving for, there is structures in place that allows it to happen. We need to develop and support communication meetings. We understand that our communication systems are getting stronger by the day, but we're not there yet. And we are consistently getting this type of feedback so we can understand not just the what in the communication, how we're communicating, and then making sure that we have a reciprocal place to get feedback, so we can actually hear our staff and their staff needs. So I want to close that, VSD administration, we will continue to identify some long-term strategies. I truly mean when I say that we are working to enhance the quality of life for our educators. We know that their retention rate in the world of education has dropped. And working with our board and knowing, understand what our board values and what our board has demonstrated in their values in the form of policy, there is an expectation that we as in the collaborative work on these long-term strategies, and we look forward to continuing to present and hearing from staff if we're hitting the mark. And I think that's going to be one of the next steps, like really hearing from staff voice around how close we're getting to adhering to these next steps and the needs and wants that were presented in the survey. So with that, I see a couple of hands up. I think Nicole, were you up?
I didn't put my hand up because your slide answered my question,
Okay,
but I think Yana has her hand up.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for presenting this. I just want to thank our staff for being transparent and letting us know what's going on. I think that for so long, we've talked about as a board, how difficult it is for us to make decisions on behalf of staff without hearing from them first. And so I just want to thank all of our staff for trusting us with this information and letting us know what they're needing and what's going to help them to be better educators for our students. We know that we can't operate without our staff. So this gives us what we need to continue to push forward and support them more. So I just want to thank them for that. We're doing what we can from this standpoint, and I appreciate them trusting us to do that and letting us know what needs to be done. Okay, now it's Nicole, I think.
Yes, you inspired me. I did have one more question. Great call out, Yana. And I kind of had two questions. First, just more operational. I know the next step is to update Skyward. Is this also going to be updated in the employee handbook as well?
So right now we're in the presentation stage. I want to work collaboratively with BAEA and VESPA to see how anything that's an adjustment in the handbook needs to be done collaboratively with them in mind. So I think looking at language, knowing that this came from the membership, enhances the need for it to be part of handbook language. But again, I don't want to speak to it without going to the collaboration process, because that steps out of our world of collaboration for policy and just my leadership style.
That's a better answer than yes. Love it. And then were there any next steps that you wanted to take that you don't have the funding right now? Or are there any next steps that you wanted to take that you need more board support in order to take? And if the answer is no, please just continue to bring those if you and your team brainstorm anything and you need more board support or more prioritization or goals to get some of these items done.
Yeah, when you ask about budgetary, that's always a need. Budget's always a need, but I think it's how we prioritize our funds that we have in place, and then think about long-term visioning. So I think the ask for the board is as we're doing budget presentations, now that you have this information, I think the questions you may come from you, like, can you talk to me about how you're leveraging equity-based budget and to adhere to what you heard from our staffing. And that type of continued support. I truly appreciate the level of accountability, not just in the form of policy, but actually hearing from our staff and myself around our desired state. And we know it'll take a while to get to this desired state, but we're asking for your support on the journey is the biggest piece of support that we need.
Dr. Clarity, I have just one last comment before I think you move on to your next part. And you touched on this as you open this, and it's that the board has set out in its policies the need for collaboration with staff and strong voice from our staff in the steps that are being taken. I just really wanted to say how much I appreciate that we're in obviously a very heightened situation that is really disruptive and really challenging for all of our staff members, but it's also highlighted that this has been a long-term issue that is just that the chasms that have existed in the profession have just been exacerbated over this period of time. I really appreciate that these are immediate steps, but they're also with a long-term vision. And I just look forward to hearing how, how the feedback continues over, the feedback loop continues over time. And just again, appreciate that you've reached out to staff to get their voice involved in what they need to get through this time and as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. I think I saw Jen's hand up.
Thanks. My lighting in the background, you can't even really see it on my little profile picture. But anyway, just to sort of echo the previous two comments, but I'd like to just say from my personal perspective as a board member, I know you would have my full support on some of those immediate pieces. So I totally recognize the long-term, all of this is so intentional and so welcome. But as Meredith was saying, right at this moment, I have great fear of what this even next 2 weeks are going to do to our staff. And I know we're all very much in the understanding of what's going on, but any of those sort of Band-Aid steps that typically we want to avoid, I think are welcome right now. I worry a lot about what our staff are grappling with and handling at this moment in for the sake of kids. Pure and simple, it's for the sake of kids, but they're struggling. So just wanted to put voice to, you would have my support as a board member for any sort of immediate things that would need to be done to help staff just get through these moments as we keep reaching toward long-term goals.
Thank you, Jen. Joe, you were up and then down. Are you good?
Joe mentioned he has a lag, so
Oh,
it may take a while to.
All right. Well, we can always come back if necessary. If it's okay, I'll go and move to the next part of the presentation. If there are no other questions, trying to scan through really quick. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Hey, Joe, did you have a question about the last one? I think he might be a little bit. I'll move and maybe Joe, use the chat if you have a question and I can go back and answer it. All right, so I wanted to be very transparent with our board and our community about, some could be predictable, but honestly, these are somewhat high numbers.
This may not work because this lag. I may need to log out and sign back in, but.
So as you can see on our 7-day trend, we have had 262 reported positive cases of COVID. You can see the data in front of you, how that spreads across our district with some building spikes more in the high school, Badger Ridge, Sugar Creek, and Glacier Edge kind of stand out in those areas. What I will say, as not to sound the alarm, is that our students and families have been and adhering to our mitigation strategies of not reporting to school has been very beneficial in not allowing this to cause massive spread within our school. So many of these were numbers coming out of break. So these are not students that reported to school. That was a huge number of them. So that responsibility and that ownership and understanding if I have symptoms to stay at home and then also get tested and then reporting that to our nursing, I think really helped us not have massive spreads in our individual locations as could have been. So while the numbers are large and we do want to continue to support the health and mental health of our students as they navigate this pandemic, I still strongly, and as I know you are board too, firmly believe in our mitigation strategies, believe in the stringent measures that we are taking to limit outbreaks within our school. but also just want to give a clear message to both you and to our community that our numbers are real. Yeah, and we need to continue to work strong as a community to keep our numbers down or hopefully begin a decline of our overall outbreaks. A new piece of data that we have added to our website, and again, in the desire to be very transparent, is our staff numbers as well. So on the next slide. Next slide, Rihanna. Here you'll see employee absences, and kind of speaking to what Jen mentioned earlier around substitute coverage. And you also heard this theme play out in in some of the health and wellness concerns from our staff in general. Now, I just want to be reminded, when we look at these numbers of absences, not all these are directly COVID related. These are reported absences, so these are overall numbers. These do include those that are symptomatic and are staying at home, and those that may have a child or such that's symptomatic and is staying home for daycare. So I don't want this to be looked at as a list of positive staff COVID cases, because that's not accurate, not the case. What it is, something we want to continue to support and provide resources across our district to fill is the substitute coverage rate. We saw that we opened up last Monday with a 62% coverage rate, and that declined to a 46% coverage rate. That in essence means that internal staff, including building staff and to some extent some central office staff, are now going to buildings and fill those classes. We know what that means in terms of teacher workload, teacher burnout, and not being able to utilize prep time, because they are now, what would have been their prep time is now going into to support other classrooms. So I wanted to relay a real message of what's happening, and also just tell you each building that we've gone into, how our staff has really wrapped supports around each other, because we still know our ultimate goal is to keep our students and our staff in school five days a week in in-person instruction. We are not very from that goal. We are still strongly committed to it, but we also always wanted to be very transparent about the circumstances that we are living in right now.
Dr. Clarity, first, thank you. I don't think we can even possibly begin to thank our staff enough for all of the flexibility and the dedication that they've shown in this challenging time in the last week. I know that when I talk to you and district staff, you are going above and beyond, but you also are saying what you're doing is nothing compared to what is being asked of our staff. So I just know this is a Herculean effort, and we are incredibly grateful. Our community, our parents, our students are incredibly grateful. I think it's important to just reiterate something that you said about our numbers. The numbers do not represent in-school transmissions. And I think that's important for just to highlight again. These are people coming out of break with the delays in testing times and the delays in getting test results. These are not representative numbers of cases that have been in our schools that have been transmitted. So I think, our schools are doing an excellent job of keeping our kids safe, doing keeping our mitigation strategies, doing this the best that we possibly can. And I'm just really, again, grateful to you and the rest of our staff for all of your efforts.
Thank you for that. And again, I appreciate the support, but I actually, when you walk in and see what our staff is doing to make this happen, I kind of even don't want to take any credit, because it's them. It's really our staff that's going above and beyond. They're the ones in classrooms. We can work on compensation, we can fill in where we can, but it's really our staff that has stepped up, and it just shows you the quality and value of what it really means to be a VSD staff member. Right. Nicole?
Yeah, I just had one quick question, maybe a couple. For absences, you brought up that this, aren't necessarily COVID related. Is there any way we could get do you have a rough idea of this time last year or on average? Like, is this extremely high? I mean, I'm assuming it's pretty high for an average Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday of the beginning of the year, but do you have any idea as to how much higher it is?
It is higher. We are at the, you know, you look at the Dane County numbers overall, we are at the, I think the highest level of spike that in modern history for the pandemic numbers. So while they don't all play into, they're not all COVID related numbers, that has had a extreme impact on the absences. And again, it's not just the person being sick, but we also are responsible for families and people in our own household and having to have that care as well. We could run a comparative or a snapshot of maybe this time last year or the last 2 years to kind of show a trend. That's, I can work with the Human Resources Department to see if we have that readily available.
Yeah,
But
if they're easy numbers, just trying to get a gauge of how much. And then my only other question was on the substitute coverage. I had heard, you know, you kind of hear anecdotally that some districts pay a little more for substitutes, some pay a little less. Do you know if neighboring districts are, I know there's a sub shortage everywhere. Is there any discrepancy with like other school districts are able to have less of a gap because they pay more a day? Or is it no, everybody's experiencing this pretty evenly?
both. Everyone is experiencing it equally. We are I think we're highly competitive for subs. I don't know that we're the top. I don't have that in front of me. And again, there are just so many substitute teachers to go around. We talk about all of Dane County. We've gone to a more of a model of more like a permanent staffing or permanent sub models as well, to make sure that we have subs that are kind of like VSD specialists or VSD specialized. Yep. So they stay with us. And it's also important to know how well both our leadership, building leadership and staff support staff. That's support subs that are coming in as well. Understanding how important they are to the continuity of the work. So there's a monetary piece of it, and there's also just making sure that we continue to treat our substitutes with a high level of respect and value.
That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that into the conversation.
I'm doing a quick scroll. If I missed your hand, please let me know. Just want to do a quick check with my colleague. Chad, did I miss anything on the sub piece of it?
No, I think you're good, Dr. Clarity. I think that's a fair summary. We can get some more of the specific data on the back end.
Copy. Thank you. All right. So before I roll out of the COVID components, I want, and also this ties into the staff surveys, because I want to give appropriate shout out and acknowledgement to our Human Resources Department overall, as well as the leader of the Human Resources Department, Rochelle Haiti, who has done a phenomenal job in helping us not only with the collecting of data on the survey and being able to develop the themes and work collaboratively to begin to do action steps, but they've also been extremely helpful in putting a substitute model in place that helps support the coverage issues, as well as some, we did adjust the monetary internal compensation, but you can't replace the value of time or the quality of the time that we put in. So I don't want to say that that's a fix all, and knowing that we have to move through this 2 to 3 week bubble together collectively, and we really ask grace from our community and grace from our board, knowing that our staff is doing everything possible to get to a really a kind of a place of sustainability, which we anticipate to be hopefully in the next 2 weeks or so. All right, I keep trying to progress on my screen as if I'm controlling it. I'm not. All right, I'm going to pause. And unless there's any other questions for me, we're going to pivot into our annual presentation for open enrollment, but it still falls under superintendent's report. That'll be led by Dr. Durkee. So if there's no other questions about any of my prior slides, we'll begin with Dr. Durkee and open enrollment. All right, floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you for a few minutes here. As part of our state required annual process around open enrollment, school boards need to vote in the month of January on the number of open enrollment slots that will be allowed into the district for the next school year. So the way we've done it in this district from before I was even here is that we do it during the 2 school board meetings in January. The first one, I take a few minutes to just do a brief overview of open enrollment, a little bit about trends and what our proposal would be for slots. And then at our next board meeting, there'd be an action item for the board to vote on. So I decided to take just a minute here, especially with some new board members, is to give a brief overview of what open enrollment is. And then I'll have a couple slides on trends, maybe the last 6 years of numbers there, and then our proposal. And then feel free to ask questions during or at the end. There's just 5 slides that should go fairly quickly. So first of all, open enrollment is a state program that began, I believe, in the 1998-99 school year. And it allows for parents to apply through a state portal to have their children or children attend a district outside of their district of residence. So in other words, state law has always been that you go to the district that you live in. Open enrollment allows for parents to choose to apply to send their kids to a district outside their residence. And then in most districts, I think actually the state law says all districts have to have 1 spot within that 4K through 12th grade where you have to reapply. Otherwise, if you get in through open enrollment into a district, you can stay year after year. In this district, by policy, going from 5th grade to 6th grade, you have to reapply. And so that's generally what open enrollment is. There is an exchange of funds that goes with that as well. And so I believe it keeps going up every year. It adjusts a little bit. The estimate for the 2022-23 school year would be $8,224 exchanged for students who do not have special education needs. And it's $13,000 roughly for those who have IEPs. Who can apply? Any Wisconsin resident, 4K through grade 12, may apply to 2 other districts, I believe. And there's also an alternative open enrollment program that happens after the window. The process, roughly after the board approves a number of slots or 0 to however many slots or unlimited slots, then parents have a set window to apply through that state portal. It's the same window across the state. So it's not a window that we have any control over. So for the 2022-23 school year, that window would be February 7th through April 29th. And I think it closes at 4 p.m. And that's the window. And so you go into that portal. It's actually a fairly easy online application. And then after that, we get all that information. We have a number of processes that our district registration office goes through. And then I personally oversee as administrator a lottery process. So if we have to place those who have applied for open enrollment slots into the slots that we have approved. If there are more apply for a slot, for example, a 3rd grade slot in the district, then we have space, then we have a waiting list. Then the district registration office notifies the parents and they may choose to either accept that offer or they can turn it down and stay at their district of residence. So that's roughly the process there. One of the questions sometimes people have is around transportation, and it is the parents' responsibility to transport their students. So if they're in a different district, open enrolling in, we don't incur a cost there, other than if they have special education needs and have transportation in their IEP. So that's the brief overview of open enrollment. Maybe before I go on to the trends, any broad questions about just what open enrollment is and how it affects the district.
Is there any difference in between if students can open enroll to the charter schools versus the non-charter schools?
Yeah, so you actually open and enroll into a district into a grade level, whatever grade level your child is in, and you may choose to like select a school that you're interested in. For example, they could select charter school, or they could select another school. We have our own charter school rules regarding priorities for that. So that's the process that we go through on the charter school end. And also, let's say it's they would really like to go to Stoner Prairie, for example, but we really don't have availability at Stoner Prairie. We get to select the school that has space. And then we offer that to the parents, and then the parents can either accept that or not. So we have a lot of flexibility on that. And once the board approves, we are really just approving slots by grade level. And then we have the whole other process to slot them. And our charters obviously have priority for those who are residents of the district. Good question. John, you have a question?
Yeah. So you said that by policy, our district has people reapply going into 6th grade. And I don't know, just being kind of newer here, what was the rationale for that policy? And then also, I just want to point out that that the application for open enrollment is after we've done the lottery for the charter schools. So to the question earlier, like it's just not generally feasible to open enroll into a charter school usually.
Yeah, that is correct. So I'll answer both of those questions, or let's see, I don't remember the first question. Maybe I'll do the second first. Let's see, your first question. Oh, the transition grade. So that is a good question. I actually don't know the answer because that was before my time when that 5th to 6th grade decision was made by a previous board. So I don't have an answer for why they chose that grade. I'm thinking it was because it was a natural transition. Most districts either transition between the elementary and middle, or they have like a K-8 district and they'll have a transition between the 8th grade to 9th grade. And so because we have elementaries, middle and high, the board had to decide, would they rather do it between elementary and middle or middle and high? And they decided to do elementary to middle for whatever reason at that time. As to the other question regarding the, you are correct, because our windows are always going to be a little bit different there. But as for charters, and this goes back to the earlier question about charters, because our priority is by far to have those who have resident status to be able to get into our charters, it's probably less of an issue. What happens after this window of open enrollment is that if there are slots still available and the lottery has already happened for charters and it's clear that there's a lot of space available, that sometimes at that point, if somebody has an interest in it, we might reach out to somebody that has expressed an interest in a charter. But usually that happens like later summer when we know for certain somebody hasn't moved into the district legitimately through residence. And we want to make sure there's a spot available if they choose to look at a charter school. So we're very careful with that process. So the windows don't matter as much since we're kind of holding off on charter placements from outside of the district. Folks, we kind of hold off on those anyway if they actually had spots. And there usually are a handful somewhere in one of the charters available. So does that help answer that a little bit, John? Okay, great. All right, let's advance to the next slide, Rhian. All right, so this is the first of two kind of trend slides, and both of them go back to 2016-17 school year. So this first one is about open enrollment spaces. What I mean by that are these are the number of spaces that the board for the year prior to that school year that's listed voted in January of that year for spaces that they approved for new to the district. So these aren't like those that are already in open enrollment that just roll up to the next grade level. These are new to the district. And so you can see the trend there, 92, 104, 39, 33, 52, and 104. So there's a period of time where we had more that were approved, and then boards made decisions to decrease that number. So that I just wanted you to have kind of a general idea of what the number was that boards are generally looking at, and that it's been up and down a little bit with a range of 104 being the high, at least in these years here, to 33 being the low. Can we advance to the next slide? This chart is the same years, but it shows the total number, so this would be new to the district, like the numbers we were just talking about, and those that are kind of ongoing here. And it shows the incoming and outgoing. So I just need to explain this maybe in a couple of different ways to make sure that we understand this chart. What this tells you is the total number of students for that year that we were educating, that were coming in through open enrollment, and the total number of students who are residents here for that year that are being educated in a different school district through open enrollment. And so what's probably more interesting here is the trend a little bit, because you can see the incoming, these are not just the ones that are newly applied, but also just are here. But if you look at the net column on the far right, I calculate out just so you get an eyeball of like, okay, so in 2016-17, we had 43 more students that were here attending under open enrollment than were outgoing. Then you can see it gradually diminished to the point that in 2019-20, we actually had more outgoing, a little bit more last year, which was because of COVID, actually. And then we're down this year to almost even. We had one less student that was outgoing, or one more outgoing than incoming. And so this gives you kind of a sense also. And there was some discussion at the last 2-3 years when I was presenting to the board, just about how we wanted to gradually increase the number of new applicants or new spaces, so we can at least get back to at least even, if not a little bit in the positive. The idea being there that if you're a little bit in the positive, at least, you already have some capacity in the district to educate a few more students, families that want to have their kids here. And if it's a little bit more of the positive, we bring in more revenue than we do send out checks to other districts. And so it's kind of a way to kind of keep that sweet spot of not overwhelming the district with too many open enrollment students, but also allowing parents to have some choices, which the whole law from the state is to allow some choice. And also to not create a kind of a burden, so to speak, on the district financially, so to kind of keep it even. And so the work that I've been kind of, as we've been trying to calculate, like what's the right number for that, never quite knowing how many are here this year under open enrollment that will just choose to go back to the district of residence. I was trying to find that right number to find that balance. And so last year, if you look back at the last slide, you'd see last year we had 104 that were new slots, new to the district, and that brought us pretty close to even. So we're kind of working our way back up. All right, let's advance to the next one. So these last 2 slides are kind of our proposal. So these are proposed open enrollment slots for next school year, 2022-23. And again, the board approves it by grade level, not by school, like I mentioned earlier. And so you can see going down this list that the total proposal is 115, which is just a few more than we proposed last year, with the knowing that a number of students will return to their district residence or move out of the state or a variety of other things. And so based on our best estimates, we believe this will bring us just slightly above the kind of even point of total incoming and outgoing open enrollment. We try to focus on more at the kindergarten, sixth grade and 9th grade levels, particularly, because those are kind of those transition spots where families that want to open enroll in, like they've finished elementary and they want to go to middle, or they finish middle, they want to go to high. So we generally have principals that want those years to have a little bit more, because then hopefully we have those families for a while and we can build those relationships with them and create some continuity of learning opportunities for the families. And then most of the other ones, we have about 5. The other thing I didn't mention is there are a number of students in the district every year that have that we've actually been educating already. So of these numbers, probably about half of them are actually students who already live here, meaning they are here under tuition waiver, which I haven't mentioned this, but tuition waiver is another state law that allows students who live here and are attending Verona Area School District, they move out of the district to continue for the rest of that year or the next year to stay in the school district. But at some point, they have to go back to their new district of residence because they moved out. But many that want to continue to go here, and we have been educating them. They're part of our district, and we want them to have that opportunity. So I like to always start with kind of a baseline of that number, so that if that parent chooses to open enroll them back in, we can continue to work with them. So about half of these new slots are actually students that would have to leave, but they may apply, and many of them do. So that's another good point for you to kind of think about when these numbers. if all of these slots were filled next year, my guess is about half of them would actually be students that are already here, but would have to leave because they've moved out. And so they're not necessarily all brand new to the district students. And the last slide, and then we can finish with some questions, is we're in special education programming. So the last number of years, we have not created any spaces for students who have special education services for a couple of reasons. One, because we want to ensure that we have the services necessary for the students who are already here for that. And also the cost associated with an average student who has a special education need is much greater than our reimbursement rate. And so a lot of districts do not have options for our students who have IEPs. And that is a requirement by state law that when they apply for open enrollment, they have to disclose that they have special education services. And so that is something we've done for, I think, the last 5 years at least, if not more, is limited or excluded those programming needs. So I see a number of hands. So who would like to go first? That's the end of my presentation, so to speak. So now's your time to ask questions. Christina, you want to go first? I'm not sure if it's.
Sure. Can you go back to the previous slide?
Sure. Rihanna, you want to? There you go.
So I have a couple questions, but one of my first ones is you mentioned that we have students who are with us and then their family changes the place of residence to outside of VASD, but we still want to be able to work with them if they choose to open enroll and be continuous. In other words, have some consistency in their education, even though they've moved. So at the high school level, where I see the 5s for sophomore, junior, and senior year, is that truly enough slots to make sure that's possible for some of the high school students? I'm just wondering, because I know it seems like the other slots, the other grade levels might be sufficient, but the high school being what, 1,600 plus students, is that enough open enrollment to ensure that someone who isn't a student who is in that situation? And I'm specifically thinking of during COVID as well, how disruptive it might be to a high school student who cannot continue at the high school that they are at right now.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And actually the short answer is yes. And this is why. It's because if they move, there's a set like matrix on DPI's website that shows when you move from the district and what your rights are regarding tuition waiver. And so if there are a number of people that move out of the district this year, they'll have rights to continue this year and maybe even next year. And so we use these numbers, the numbers I was talking about are those that have lost the final year's rights. So you get like a part of the year for tuition waiver and you get an additional year. So many of the ones that would be moving this year would have all the way till the end of next year, which would be another year for us to look at that data before the board votes next January for the following year. And so we use those data to make sure. So this includes all the numbers of those that we know for certain would not have a slot next year unless they would be enrolled. Anybody that moves after open enrollment slots would open are by state law allowed to continue through next year.
Okay, and then my other question / comment, I think it's more of a comment, is just given what we've discussed, not at this meeting, but at previous board meetings about the challenges, budgetary challenges that we're facing, is this an attempt to really keep the outgoing and incoming even, or might it be that we would take more so that we can make sure we're on the positive side? Because when I look back at those years where we had an increase, I think it was like 16, 17, 17, 18, I don't remember exactly from the previous slides. I do recall past board discussion about making sure open enrollment was a significant positive for us, especially if we were facing budget challenges where we thought, okay, having a little bit of extra funds from open enrollment, we can handle educating the students, and having those funds would be very beneficial in a tough budget year. So that's just my wondering or quandary, is this number high enough to make sure that happens? Because I think it would be very difficult if we shoot, we don't give ourselves enough of a cushion and then we end up in the negative.
Sure. So what I can say is that these numbers are based on our best estimates in working hand in hand also with business services, best estimates on trying to find that balance of inching that number up, like you're saying, right? Because I remember those conversations to get to a place where we know we're a positive, but also we know we're a growing district for those that are moving into the district, to make sure that we're not bringing in so many students that like we're actually feeling the pinch in a grade level or at a school where we'd have to then hire a teacher, which then would kind of counteract any financial benefit to the district. So there's a little bit of data involved and a little bit of kind of best estimate and sort of projection work that we do to try to find that sweet spot. And so as you notice, the last 4 years, I think it was, or this would be the 3rd or 4th year, we have inched that the new number up of open enrollment slots. And again, not always knowing how many might move out. If fewer people move out that are currently open enrolled or choose to not open enrolled, that number could actually increase more than we think. So that's a little bit of a, yeah, it's a tricky one to find the right spot, but I'm pretty confident that with this number and the numbers we've had for the last 4 years, we will be in the positive. Yeah, how much in the positive will be hard to say until people make those choices. Yeah. Thanks for your comment. Let's see. How about Joe? Hey, Joe, you want to see if you can?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
my
there we go.
audio
We hear you.
issue's been resolved. Okay, great.
Yeah, we hear you now.
I was just curious about historically, what percentage of our quota do we fill on any given year? Do we consistently have more applicants than availability, or does it vary year to year, or does it vary by grade level? Do we have more than our quota at the elementary level, but not the high school level? I was just curious historically how that's been.
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple pieces, and I have all the data right here. One, in a typical year, we have a lot more applicants than we do slots. That being said, for example, this year, I think we had a record number of applicants going into this year, but many also turned us down. And that was because of coming out of COVID, they were like trying to keep their options open, right? In a typical year, though, we have whatever slots we have available are filled. So this year we have like a handful left that actually aren't because of just movement and because of the COVID situation. But prior to that, it was always like every slot was filled. And so I think that that's going to be the same. The grades that you tend to get a lot are the younger grades because families want to come in and then stay through graduation if they can. We also get a lot at kindergarten. So I think 3 years ago, we had 10 slots. We upped it to 15 last year. We decided to do 20 this year because we feel like we have the capacity, and principals really like having more on the front end because they know that they'll have those families with them for a number of years. We tend to, especially with new high school, get quite a few at the 9th grade level and then starting out middle school. So that's why those three have some of the higher numbers that we're offering because we know those are the ones that we get the most applicants. Jen, and then we'll come back to John.
Yeah, and I don't know that I have a question anymore, but I just wanted to make sort of the statement of, could you tell me all the variables that you consider when you come with these numbers? And so I think in all of these previous answers, you've kind of drawn some of that out. Principal input, I'm hearing lots of different things, but if there would be anything else that you haven't shared that sort of go into this overall projection, I would just be curious to hear that, and even for just board understanding and community understanding of how we sort of arrive at these numbers.
Yeah, I think, like you said, I've answered some of that already. Definitely how many are we predicting already are here that might be leaving or losing their chance to be here. The other one we do look at is just, and I think I've alluded to it, but it's just around enrollment trends in general. So like looking at how many students are we rolling up this fall from 3rd grade to 4th grade. How many teachers do we have there? Where are we probably going to need to add a section anyway? Because what you really want to do with these numbers is, and this is where kind of the magic comes in, I think, is you're trying to find where's their capacity already. We have a chair in the room. We already hired a teacher. The class sizes aren't too large. We have the books already. Like really, we have a spot. And so then we'll have a financial benefit to fill that spot, and we'll be able to help a family who wants to be educated here in the BASD. But we're not going to be stretching ourselves where it makes it more difficult to educate all students. And so you're trying to find that sweet spot with enrollment and capacity in buildings and just the desire, which is a good desire to let families that are already have connections to the district or have siblings or they've already been educated here to remain with us, finding that right spot. So those are some of the factors we look at. Yep. All right. I think the last one might be John.
Yeah, I just wanted a follow-up question with the number of special education slots. You said that generally districts don't do that because the services are more expensive than the the reimbursement or whatever, and that's because they just reimburse for the student fees. They don't do reimbursements, extra reimbursements based on the services required. Is that correct?
Kind of. There are two reimbursement rates. One for general ed and one for special. Special ed is a little higher than the general ed reimbursement or cost. So for example, we would pay, let's say there's a student who is open enrolling out and they have an IEP and they've been approved by a different district, we reimburse that district a higher rate than if they didn't have an IEP, right? But what I was trying to say is that on average, that doesn't cover the cost of most students who have special education needs. They can be significantly more than that. And where we have a little bit more predictability around general ed costs on average, it's a little less predictable with special education costs. And the reality is when we're looking at students who move into districts who have IEPs, we have a fairly low overall percentage here in the Verona Area School District. A big kudos to like the work we've done with diagnostic work and our MTSS work and our just a general ed supports. But when we have students who move in who have IEPs, they actually tend to be higher cost students. We actually get quite a bit of funding for high cost students. And so trying to just make sure that we're using our resources first to make sure that we're supporting the program of students who have IEPs that are already here. And that's been generally our philosophy prior to me arriving 5 years ago, but just kind of been maintaining that general approach. Yeah. All right, great questions. I hope this was helpful. So the next step will be in 2 weeks at the next board meeting. We will bring back this proposal and there'll be an action item on the agenda for the board to vote on approving these 115 slots. So.
Thanks, Emmett. I appreciate it. Board members, can you make sure that if you have a hand emoji that it's put down so we can continue to use that moving forward? And I also want to do a quick time check. I want to be cognizant of the fact that our administrators have had an incredibly long day on top of an incredibly long past week and are looking at long days in the future. So I want to make sure that we are not keeping them too late and we can continue on with our agenda. So if there's questions that can be forwarded after the meeting, that would be great too. Definitely ask questions that you have tonight if they're important to the board's understanding and to the community's understanding. But I do want to keep an eye on the time so that we're not keeping our administrators too late after they've already been putting in 12 hours so far at this point. All right, so we have our next part of the superintendent's report.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you again, President Christensen. And really, first I want to say thank you to Emmett for the presentation and great questions from the Board of Education. Just a reminder that this will now shift on the agenda on our 24th meeting to board action, and hence the reason for us providing the previous details today. Definitely want to be able to make sure that we give full attention to our TWE program articulation to the high school. We talk about two-way immersion. We saw kind of some of the power of being bilingual in our opening statements of our equity statement, as it was read by Christina Navarro. And we want to provide both you and our community some insight into the TWE articulation into the high school, both for an update and knowing that course selections will start to come in within the next few weeks. So it's important that you have this information in front of you before we take that next step. So I'm going to quickly transition to Dr. Sylvia Romero Johnson. Thank you so much for being here today. She's got about a 10 to 15 minute presentation and then opportunity for questions at the end.
Thank you, Dr. Clarity. Good evening, members of the Board of Education, district staff, and the community at large. I will provide a brief update on the current plans for articulating and providing continuation for our students moving into the high school. Next slide. And since we already read the equity statement, I just want to highlight that language, family background, ethnicity, family income, all of those are areas that are critical for two-way immersion programs as part of an equity strategy. Next slide. When the program was first conceived of, there were a set of foundational beliefs that were developed. I just want to highlight the last piece about the importance of students coming together into a learning environment in which their backgrounds and linguistic profiles are valued and viewed as assets. That's an important piece of our bilingual program. Next slide. As a reminder, the model that the district adopted is what we call the 50-50 model, which means that half of the instruction, the academic instruction, is in English, and the other half is in a partner language, in this case, Spanish. And the program has three main goals: bilingualism and biliteracy, which means we want all students to be able to understand, speak, read, and write in the two languages of the program, attain achievement at the grade level or higher, and to develop sociocultural competence. In the program design, the decision was made to provide access to Spanish through Spanish language arts, science and social studies, and then access to English instruction through English language arts, math, and of course, all the co-curricular classes. Next slide, please. So this is a brief timeline about when the program was started. So what we have is the first cohort that started kindergarten in the 2013 and 2014 school year, now being 8th graders at Badger Ridge. And so we find ourselves at this time really planning for their transition into 9th grade and for the next 4 years. Next slide, please. So we have worked, this is what the next 4 years would look like. Since the program provided access to proficiency into the two languages, but in Spanish through science and social studies, we felt that the content area that would continue to provide that access to proficiency and to grade level instruction would be in the content areas of science and social studies. And what we foresee is that we would alternate providing 1 year access to a science course, another year access to a social studies course. Then it also became very evident that the traditional world language courses would not be suitable for students who have spent 9 years developing proficiency in a language, in a partner language. So we are looking at offering a set of courses through the world languages set of courses for 4 years. In addition to that, once we get to the high school level, we come together, the TWI program needs as well as the ESL program needs. So we foresee also offering mathematics courses, algebra and geometry that would be suitable, and students in the TWI program would be eligible to also participate. Next slide, please. So as the grade levels continue and we continue to implement, you will see that we are again alternating and offering a science course, a social studies course, as well as getting into AP courses for Spanish language and for AP Spanish literature. In addition to that, towards the last couple of years, students could also potentially have access to Spanish youth options possibilities. Okay, and the next slide. And what's important is to know that students would continue to be able to at least maintain their language proficiency, but also work towards eligibility towards the Wisconsin Seal of Biliteracy. Our district got approved about 4 years ago for the Wisconsin Seal of Biliteracy, and students in the TWE program would be very well suited to be able to pursue this high school award. Students would have to demonstrate language proficiency in English and a partner language. And then they have to also demonstrate an understanding of culture through a variety of activities in both English and the partner language. And while they would receive the medallion and recognition upon graduation, they need to work throughout, and they could potentially qualify for it as early as their junior year. They would have an additional opportunity during their senior year. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So our next steps in the planning are to continue to meet with staff at the high school level to ensure that everyone shares the same understanding, particularly with high priority working with the counselors, so that they are all on the same page, understanding what the courses are, what are the options, and making sure that the families and students receive that advice. We did offer prior to winter break an informational session for families and students. It was well attended, but we want to offer more sessions in the next couple of weeks to make sure that all questions are answered for students and families. We're also going to establish a committee of world language teachers and science teachers to make sure that we have ample time to develop a learning framework and the curricular materials, starting this spring semester and continuing through the summer and the next 4 years. And of course, establishing a recruitment strategy and hiring timeline for bilingual staff for the courses next year and future courses as students continue to opt into them. So these are just a few pictures of the children. The years went by fast. We can go to the next slide. And they've grown bilingual and bicultural, and it'll be wonderful and exciting for them to be able to continue with their coursework and minimally maintain proficiency, but of course, why not continue to grow in proficiency as well? What questions do you have?
I have a quick question. Primero, gracias por todo y por su trabajo y ese programa. This is wonderful. I think it's fantastic. And I guess my main question, I'm probably going to annoy maybe every parent or every board member this year because I am playing the role of new parent. I have a child myself coming into the district. And so just kind of want to make sure that people in my position as well, or people new to our school district, understand how to access these wonderful programs. So where could our students and families go to learn more about the TWE program and how to get engaged, at what grade is the right interaction level and things like that?
Yes, so while this presentation was only about the 8th to 9th grade transition, we are also working with families who are going to be kindergarten incoming families and with the 5th grade families into 6th grade transition. So we have those 3 transitions going on at the same time. So as part of the kindergarten registration, all families coming into the district will receive information about how to enroll for kindergarten. And as part of that, both Sugar Creek and Glacier Edge will provide informational sessions about the school as a whole, as well as the two-way immersion program. In addition to that, we're also sending out communication and about how to access additional informational sessions that we will provide both in English and Spanish.
Wonderful.
There is also a website, and we can share, with you where that information is located.
That would be wonderful. And I think as we work on kind of our new incoming kindergarten parents, kind of bundling this with all of the other fun information would be so great. So thank you.
Mhm.
I'll follow up on what Nicole said, but first of all, I wanted to thank the staff for the informational session that was held at Badger Ridge Middle School in December. I did attend that, and it was well attended by a number of families, parents of the students who are going to be making the transition from 8th grade into the high school next year. So that was wonderful. I don't know yet what your plans are for informational sessions for people maybe who didn't attend that or have other questions, because I know if they attended that, they might have thought of some things. But given the situation right now, I don't know if those sessions would be coming up soon, but I was wondering if maybe there would be one on Zoom. I did get that question from somebody who couldn't attend the one in December, if there would be any informational sessions that would be held virtually if they could not make it in person. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yes. The follow-up sessions will be held through Zoom, and we will have them in English and Spanish.
Okay.
Yeah, we will just send out communication about that to current families. Yes.
Okay, that would be great in case someone can't attend in person for whatever reason. And it is exciting. And much of this information I saw at the December informational meeting. So for board members who haven't seen it, it's really gratifying to see this initial cohort move on to high school, and to see the opportunities and possibilities of their education moving forward, and seeing them, for example, get to like the AP Spanish literature and AP Spanish language classes, some of them probably fairly early in their high school career, which will be wonderful to see the progress. And I know there was high interest in the seal of biliteracy in the December meeting, so I anticipate there will be more high interest among families on that. So it's just great to see them, because some of the kids in these pictures I've seen since kindergarten. And so it goes by quickly. All of a sudden they're big 8th graders, but I still remember them as like 5-year-olds.
Jen?
Just a quick question from my sort of not being in the TWE program. On slide 17, you shared that the goal was 50-50 two-way immersion, with the 3 goals that you outlined. And I'm just doing my math brain calculations. I can see how 50-50 immersion might structure more easily in an elementary setting. Is that goal still part of what you just described to us at the high school level? Are the students still able to do the 50-50 with the language, with the classes you've outlined, or is that goal just can't be as robust at the high school? I'm just curious how that looks, just thinking about the classes you outlined.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So at the high school level, it's really no longer a 50-50 program. The 50-50 description is kindergarten through 8th grade. That's very specific to those grade levels. And so at the high school level, we call it, continuation of the TWE program, articulation into high school. The students, as the students go up in grade levels, the following cohorts will have more and more options. But that first group is, opening up like they've done from the beginning, opening up opportunities. But I would imagine, by the time they're in seniors, the freshmen will have, possibly much more opportunities and more flexibilities across courses.
Thank you, Dr. Romero Johnson. This is exciting to see this fantastic program continue to grow, especially over the years on the board that this is now growing with our kids and heading into the high school levels. And we appreciate all the work that you have done to continue to make this such a successful program.
Thank you.
Board members, could you make sure that you double check on hand emojis? I like being able to use that as we move forward. Thank you.
All right, that officially concludes the superintendent's report. And thank you to our Board of Education for being a great audience.
As we are moving into the results policy, I just want to just center, the board in our role as we do this. This is our first crack at viewing a results monitoring process. Just as we're going through this, our focus again is on the reasonable interpretation. That the superintendent understands the underlying goals of the board's policy, and that when we're looking at the indicators and performance targets, that that they'll be sufficient to help us determine whether or not reasonable progress has been achieved. So I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Clarity to present his policy, but I just want to make sure that we have our focus kind of front and center as we move forward.
All right, thank you again. First, I want to invite members from the academic services team into the space. Here with me, we have Dr. Angela Hawkins and Mrs. Karen Stocks-Glover, as well as Dr. Silver Romero Johnson, who representing the academic services team, who played a key role in the development of the results policies that will be presented to you today. I wanted to open with a quote from chapter 5 of our work in our book on the governance model, which I really resonated with me in multiple capacities, and keeping us make sure that we have a focus on our work, and especially the work that we are going to engage in today. Is the reason for any district to exist is to provide benefits, and in our case, student outcomes for the people it serves. And so when you think about us as an organization, a Verona Area School District organization, I was hired, and what I am accountable for through the expectations of our Board of Education is the results of our students, is in essence student outcomes. Student outcomes can be measured in different ways. We have the academic, we have emotional support, and we have different variables, but ultimately we are here as servant leaders to our community and servant leaders to our students. And so I really hope this keeps us grounded in our focus today. There's many times to talk and ask about, who's the next football coach, or who's when are we going to build here? And those are all important questions. But when you talk about student results and actually why behind the work, this is what I would like and desire to stand out and keep us focused and honed in on. So can we go to the next slide, please? So the items that we're going to present and ask for the Board of Education to accept today will be in the form of interpretations, indicators, and then some short-term and long-term targets. And I apologize for the second capitalized T on targets there. I didn't catch that. And the obsessive compulsive person he's going to stare at the whole time. Not that that's good. But when we say the interpretations, I sent an email or a clarification, because when working with our board in development of our policies, especially results policies, I really wanted to make sure language that resonated and really encompassed kind of that gut of what does our board really want, and because we know that you are the representations of our community. So what does our community truly want? And so I did make a slight shift to and re-entering the value, and I'll tell you why. I think there's been a clear expectation from our Board of Education of making sure that we develop critical thinking students. And they need to be named. They need to be named as a value, because I heard it over and over again as we develop policies, and we heard it over and over again each time that we talk about our students. We know that language arts, interpretation of language arts is a strong component of developing a critical thinker, but I wanted to go that and put that in the space so it was truly a part of the interpretation. So I hope that you please accept that quick modification that we sent from the original, and I wanted to tell you why that modification was made. Okay. So as we think about our policy, we want to go into the what and understanding that the how stays at the level of the superintendent and staff. So the what is actually the policy and your desire that is to be achieved. And our board has named that each student will be literate and numerate and able to achieve their personalized goals accordingly. Each student will achieve at individually and appropriately challenging levels and acquire academic competencies in the following disciplines. Right. The only discipline we're going to talk about today is language arts. But we also know language arts resonates across content, which is a quick shift that we made and that you'll see in a highlighted area, because absent of that, you can't have a critical thinker in one area. You have to have critical thinkers that can think across content areas and utilize skills across every area that we provide within our classrooms, and then development of social emotional skills as well. Those language arts skills are a key part of it. Like, how do we communicate with each other? How do we know and understand? How do we pull information and pull it apart and form an opinion that's based off your own thoughts and ability to take in and often speak back out information. We saw a great example of that with our book club earlier today. These are students that are digging in and developing those critical thinking skills because they are digging deep into the work of language arts. So I can get excited about this, but I know this is not about me. This is about our academic services team. And before I have Ms. Karen Stoss-Glover kind of talk about their process, especially as we get into the indicators, as I present this report to you and then put the report back in your hands, I'm going to ask you, is the interpretation of the policy reasonable? I'm going to ask you, are the indicators that are observable behaviors, are they actionable? Okay. We are going to intentionally have to stay out of process. Process is not the lane that we're in right now. Process happens, or the how, you deserve to know that, but it's not in this setting. You learn the how in the superintendent's reports that we just presented. That's why we do tweak programs. That's why we'll do academic updates. That's where this lives. Right now, I'm asking you to stay in that area. Do the indicators fall into those categories? And is it a reasonable interpretation? We will continue to provide the how along the way, because rightfully so, you deserve to know that, and our community deserves to know that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Stoss-Glover to kind of give an overview of their thought process, especially around the indicators, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Clarity. Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Karen Stoss-Glover, the Director of Secondary Education, and I have the privilege of representing the academic services tonight. As Dr. Clarity said, our goal was to work with the policy that you wrote for us and to determine how we were going to deliver on the outcomes of this policy. So when you look at the policy interpretation itself, you can see that, as Dr. Clarity said, we began with the value statement, understanding what the board values when we were thinking about literacy for students across all grade levels in the Verona Area School District, as well as taking the time to be sure that we were appropriately interpreting key terms in terms of defining what it means to be literate, what we mean by personalized goals, and certainly what we meant by each student. The indicators that we were able to identify for this policy include ACT and Aspire, a testing suite used for high school students that's aligned to college readiness benchmarks, as well as STAR reading assessments, which can be delivered from early literacy to grade 9 in the Verona Area School District. The reason that we chose STAR was because STAR is currently the available assessment that we have, and it's also an assessment that allows us to do benchmarking with students being assessed in the fall, the winter, and again in the spring. When we think specifically about benchmark assessments, and again, that's embedded in the definition of terms in the policy here, is that we want to be able to measure student progress, and that progress is aligned to standards and learning goals. But the benchmarking has the potential to allow educators to identify specific areas of growth for students. And when we think about our goals, our overarching goals that all graduates, all students will be literate, that we want to be sure that we have opportunities to identify what those key growth goals are moving forward. In addition, we wanted to be sure that we identified what those critical educational terms were around critical thinking and problem solving, because we know that students being engaged as critical thinkers and being problem solving is essential to being literate as well. So when we look at the specific indicators for R211, they are organized in a fashion that I'd like to lay out for you so that we can be sure that we address any questions that you might have. So indicator 1, moving through A, B, and C of indicator 1, and indicator 2 all refer to the English assessment of the STAR. That first indicator is about ensuring that students in grades 2nd through 9th grade are meeting benchmark on the STAR English assessment. So that first one is the overall in the aggregate. And then from there, we wanted to be sure that we disaggregated specifically for groups of students that were important for us to continue to monitor and benchmark as one of our indicators. So that first, indicator 1A, we identify students who assess in the urgent intervention and set a growth goal or an expectation that we move those students from urgent intervention to intervention. And for clarity purposes for the school board, urgent intervention is indicative of any student who scored below the 10th percentile on the STAR reading assessment. And intervention is any student who is in the category of the 10th to the 24th percentile on the STAR assessment. So we wanted to be sure that we were paying attention to those students who would be scoring at the urgent intervention level and working diligently to ensure that we see some growth and some significant progress in reading as quickly as possible. Indicator 1B identifies focus groups, and those focus groups will be determined annually based on what the data tells us. Typically and historically, focus groups for students have been our Black African American students, our Latinx students, and our special education students. So again, an expectation, an indicator that we will increase the number of focal students meeting the benchmark in those grades. Also, we wanted to then further disaggregate the focus group into who in the focus group are students that are at that urgent intervention, needing to move to intervention as quickly as possible. And then finally, in indicator 2, again, in the English assessment, looking at what STAR has to offer us in terms of a standard growth projection in reading. And what the growth projection is growth in comparison to the academic peers who also take the assessment within our school district. Looking at the same grade and a similar scale score, we're able to look at a growth projection with the indicator being that we would have students maintaining or increasing their standard growth projection on STAR reading assessment every year. Then when we begin looking at indicators 3 through 4, you see the same language, specific language related to those indicators, but now applied to our TWE students and students taking the Spanish version of the STAR assessment. So recognizing that the STAR has the flexibility for students who are, as Dr. Romero Johnson just described to us, becoming bilingual and biliterate, giving them the opportunity, and certainly native language speakers, giving them the opportunity to assess in Spanish, using those same indicators, but specifically on the Spanish assessment data collection. Indicator 5 and 5A focuses on our kindergarten students, some of our youngest students in the district, looking at the percentage of those who are meeting benchmark on the STAR early literacy assessment, and then looking at those students
who are meeting the benchmark on early literacy and increasing that every year. The question that you might ask as you look at the indicators is, where is first grade? You can see that we have assessment indicators for kindergarten, and you can see that we have assessment indicators for grades 2 through 12. The reason that we are not calling out a specific indicator for first grade is because the data is a little bit different in collection. So briefly, in kindergarten, in the fall assessment, in kindergarten, all students take the early literacy exam. In first grade, all first graders take the early literacy exam in the fall. And depending on where they score on the benchmark assessment, some of them will continue to assess in the early literacy STAR assessment, and some will be moved into a first grade STAR assessment, again, depending on what that fall score is. So our first graders could be taking either the early literacy assessment or they could be taking the first grade assessment. And because of that, we made the decision not to collect that data because it would be very hard to disaggregate it in any meaningful way for us. And then lastly, when we look at indicator 6 and 6A, we're looking specifically at our students in grades 9 through 11, meeting those college readiness benchmarks on the ACT Aspire in the reading assessment, and then a focus group, again, depending on the data, or focus groups for the ACT Aspire reading benchmarks. And when we look at the qualities of the college readiness benchmarks in reading, we know that the areas that students will be assessed in are close reading, identifying themes, writing summaries or understanding summaries, word meaning, word choice, understanding arguments and comparing multiple text, all skills which are very clearly college readiness skills, but also all reading skills that students develop over time as they move through our school district, grades kindergarten through 9. So those are the indicators that we have identified. And again, as Dr. Clarity said, we are asking for you to approve our indicators, and certainly want to leave open any time for you all to ask questions about the work that we've done, or provide any feedback that you'd like to us.
So thank you for that, Karen, for the summary of the indicators. The board has had this in their hands for a while to be able to dig deeper into the work. And so we anticipate, and just a second, putting it back in the board's hands for, or opening it up for discussion and putting it back in the board's hands for their own personal discussion. If we could quickly go to the next slide before we go to the stage, just wanted to kind of go deeper into our ask. And so as you think about our results policy and what that really means for VSD, we're really asking you that you monitor and hold us leadership accountable for incremental progress. Within the indicators, you should be able to get a report that shows the direction of the district. Of course, we desire this sharp arrow up of incremental process, and we're also realistic that sometimes circumstances don't always allow for that. But we still need to be very transparent and honest with our public and with you, our board, around what is really happening in our district. How are our resources being played out in terms of student outcomes? And that, when we get to a second layer, when we get past the interpretations and indicators, is what you should expect and hold us accountable for. Next, our ask is to monitor and hold leadership accountable for the capacity building. Quite frankly, some of the things that we desire to do don't exist in our system yet. And we want to name that we are utilizing assessments that we have readily accessible to us, and we may learn that it may need to shift. So along the way, we're going to build a capacity and learn from our classrooms and learn from our teachers and students. What does it really work? What really works in terms of formative assessment? So that actually guides student outcomes, and we actually learn and understand how we can best partner with our staff, provide the necessary professional development. But that will take some time for us to build that capacity in those systems. And so those are, we've talked about the ask for today. So I just wanted to kind of give a deeper lens of what we're really striving to be able to do in leadership with the board's approval. So with that, we're going to turn it to the board for questions and then put it back in your hands for your personal discussions.
Dr. Clarity, right now, board, if you have questions that are related to clarifying questions about any of the indicators or the interpretations, now would be the perfect time to ask Dr. Clarity and his team about that. And Dr. Clarity, I'll just, you could go ahead and call on board members at this point for the clarifying questions.
Yana?
Hey, Yana.
Thank you so much. Thanks for presenting this. It really helped me understand where you're all going with this.
Did I freeze or did Yana freeze?
I think she froze.
Or are you planning on monitoring individual students or the band itself? Oh, is my internet going out? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm anticipating that was a great question, but I got about 4 words out of it.
Okay, so I'll start over. When you're in your urgent intervention and intervention bands, are you monitoring the bands themselves or the individual students within the bands? And I ask that because if a student moves from urgent intervention to just intervention, we're still making progress, but then our intervention numbers may go up. So I'm just curious, are we monitoring the bands themselves or the individual students?
Yeah, that's a great question, Yana, and I'll start by answering it. We're monitored for the purpose of the policy. We're monitoring the bands, but we're certainly monitoring students, individual students at the school level. So our school leaders, their leadership teams, through their continuous improvement planning process, through their identification of focal students, because they are also looking at STAR reading as part of our continuous improvement plan, are focusing specifically on the individual student to ensure that there is an appropriate intervention in place for that student.
Okay.
For the purpose of the policy, we're looking at the bands.
Okay. I guess board members, I just want us to think about that when we get the report on the other side. When I think about the data, it could look kind of wonky, but we're still making progress in the right direction, even if some of our numbers are a little bit off. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, Yana, to your point is when you talk about the other side of it and the actual monitoring reports, then remember you'll have the bands from the policy component, but will provide the board with updates on the continuous improvement plans, which have very individualized student-based data at each school level. So it'll have both and as far as the evidence to be able to support growth.
Perfect, thank you. I just want to be sure that you all are actually able to, and we are too, actually able to see progression so that we can monitor what's actually happening in the data. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to go in order that I see them on screen. Nicole?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I just had a really quick question on the focus groups. So that's where disability status falls in. I just want to understand, are we getting kind of in depth as well of like, if you have an IEP, like what are the different groups so that we make sure we're really understanding, I guess the point of when we put a lot of time into this policy, which was making sure that every student can be successful to what is successful for them. So could you speak to just a little bit of how you intend to make sure that the focus groups are also kind of not busted out, but like even more detailed on the disability status?
Sure. So when the focus group is determined based on the fall assessment. So in that first assessment, we're able to look at who are the students who are below proficient. And we're able to disaggregate based on race, ethnicity, disability. And typically what we see in schools is that students who fall into the focus group are often our Black African American students, our Latinx students, and students with disabilities. We don't necessarily in that focus group identification identify how many of those students have a learning disability and of what kind, but we're looking at students with IEPs. The work that happens at the school level is based on understanding who those students are through the continuous improvement planning process, and then making sure that there's a deep understanding of the IEP goals and how that student can be supported to meet those reading goals as well.
Gotcha. I think that's and maybe when the actual results monitoring reports are delivered, it just feels like maybe the output of that focus group is almost measured in two different places. But I might be thinking about that a little off. But I think you answered my question. Thank you. I might mull it over a little bit more just to understand and track with what you're saying, but thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, next on my screen, I have Christina.
Sorry, I'm speaking and I'm on mute. Okay. So my question is a simple clarification. So under definition of terms, and maybe I'm noticing this now because we just had a presentation about the two-way immersion program. Correct me if I'm wrong, but with TWE, we've always referred to two-way immersion as our program where we have roughly half of our participants are native speakers. So they are native speakers of Spanish. I would want some kind of clarification. I think with the Mandarin immersion program, it's a dual language immersion program, but we don't usually refer to it as TWE or two-way immersion. So I don't know if there's a different term to be used there. And also, since the indicators, I do not see an indicator here that refers to Mandarin assessment. So I think maybe that bullet point under definition of terms needs some clarification.
Yeah, thank you for that. That is something that we wrestled with because we don't have a clear benchmarking assessment for the Mandarin program. And yet we wanted to determine if there were ways for us to develop a measure to understand student progress in the language of instruction. So you're right, it's not clear yet, and we will get it clear.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, that really falls under kind of that last slide that we have up about capacity building. Again, those are things that fall into that. There isn't as Mrs. Stocks-Glover said, a great definition or even process of understanding the work of the students that you mentioned. So we had identified it, know it's there, and I think we would ask that the board holds accountable for building that capacity along the way. And if we can't answer that a year from now or 2 years from now, that's where we have not made reasonable progress.
Yes, I don't have so much problem with years. I just think that definition of terms needs a little clarification too, because our community really does associate TWE with the program that has the native speaking population in it. So we just need to be careful too, not confusing the community.
Thanks for that.
Are there any additional questions for Dr. Clarity and his team from the board? John?
Yeah, sorry. I thought I had my hand up and then I got disconnected briefly. So apparently it lowered my hand for me. So I have a couple questions. My first question is in regards to some of the indicators which talk about the percentages of students that move categories increasing each year. And maybe I'm reading that incorrectly, but it feels like that percentage can't increase indefinitely, because it's the percentage of students that move out of a category. So I'm wondering if it's more appropriate to have like a certain percentage that we want to move, but to say that that's eventually you run out of students, which is a good thing. And maybe we have to adjust it then, and that's the idea. I just don't know that that goal is a sustainable one, that we expect the percentage to increase when we're talking about students moving categorical bands. So that's my first question. My second question around the a couple of the languages in the interpretation. And maybe this will come up in our discussion. But I was wondering if somebody could explain how explain the importance of indicating oh, I'm really struggling to do this in a way that jives here. I'm struggling with this notion of this language around more complex texts. And maybe if somebody just wants to clarify, okay, that the nonfiction seems to be the more complex texts here. And then my last question is around the definition of literate. And just if someone can clarify how that definition speaks to the inclusion of students who are enrolled in special education who might have more severe challenges that they're experiencing. Those are my three, I think. And some of them might be more appropriately pushed. So if people want to push that to the following discussion, that's fine.
I can try to go in reverse order. Your question about students with disabilities and literate, if you recall, during our policy development, that actually was why we added appropriately challenging levels to that. When we built the policy, that was probably a good hour of our discussion on that date. And rightfully so. We needed to put it out there and left it up. And so you remember when we're writing definitions, we're not supposed to just repeat the language that's in the policy. And so because it was already existing there, that's where we saw appropriately challenging falling into that literate component of it. I knew if I didn't write it. Question number one was the would we hopefully move out of run out of students as we move to the band? The answer is yes, but that's also why these are annually reviewed. What we would, once we get to those spaces, we would provide new indicators or resources, or excuse me, or expectations for continued growth. As also an example, as you notice, we have some quasi language around like proficiency and such, but we have not yet gone into the advanced world or those. So those are things that still are room for continued to growth. It doesn't mean that they are less than an expectation, but this is kind of our current state now. And then can you remind me of the second?
The second question?
Yeah.
Just the notion of more complex texts.
Yeah, that's it. Karen or Dr. Hawkins, do you want to speak to that, or else I can also do it as well, either way.
No, John, you called it out when you were asking the question that the complexity of text in science and social studies and the reading that is specific to those content areas, particularly as students progress in the years. So we were just trying to identify that is part of the progression of reading skills over time.
Yeah, I don't think it's not an intentional to try to say fiction over nonfiction, which I think was part of your question as well. It's not like a value statement that we value one versus the other. Was that what you were asking?
Sorry for the delay there. I got to push my buttons. Yeah, that's kind of it. That it kind of read to me a little bit more like a value statement, as one is more complicated and should be worked towards more than the other. But again, that's maybe a concern for another time.
I think anyone that's tried to take on Don Quixote would think differently.
Probably more appropriate, John, is differing complexities, not intended to be a value at all.
All right, with that, President Christensen, we'd like to turn this over to the board for your hands.
Thank you so much for this presentation. This has been, it's been very informative for us to see the different types of assessments that are in place and also see what type of capacity building needs to take place as we move forward. This is all brand new work, and I'm really impressed by the level of detail in the presentation that was given tonight. So thank you all for your hard work. This is definitely, this is exciting for us to be moving into an area where we can be doing more, focus more on data and our students' results, and you are setting the pathway for us to do that effectively. So thank you for everything that you've provided tonight. And then that leaves us, members of the board, that we have received and discussed the superintendent's interpretations and indicators for results policy 2.1.1. And I will now accept a motion to accept and approve the interpretations and indicators as presented so that we can begin the board's discussion. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, that was motion from, I heard Joe first. Is there a second?
Nicole can second.
Thank you. I appreciate saying your names when you do this, because otherwise I'm like trying to, look at the Brady Bunch screen to see whose mouth is moving. Okay, we have a motion by Joe and a second from Nicole. The board can now discuss the interpretation and indicators as provided in the report. And again, to reiterate, this is slightly different from our OE monitoring in that we are looking at the indicators and the performance targets, but the continuity that we're going for is that we're coming at this from the reasonableness standard. So I want to make sure that we are focusing on, is the interpretation reasonable? Are the indicators reasonable? And are the performance standards presented in the indicators reasonable? So starting with that, do we want to start with?
Excuse me, President Christian, I just need 2 minutes. I'm gonna turn this place Dr. Hawkins as a lead. I just gotta run a quick break and I'll be right back in here.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so let's start with going up to the interpretation. If we can start at the beginning of the report, and I have like 12 different screens going on right now, so I'm trying to juggle through this. I want to just go through the beginning of the report, and we can hit any questions as we go through in kind of chronological order. Are there any questions from the reasonableness perspective for the board about the superintendent's interpretation of the results policy?
I think the interpretation is great. I think the only thing that I think about when I read this, and it has nothing to do with our staff or what they've put together here, is ways that we can look at the progress of our students that are not standardized test based. Again, it has nothing to do with our staff. It's a national thing that eventually will get dealt with, I hope. But just we all know about the struggles and the challenges of standardized tests, and they don't always measure all of the great things that are actually happening. And so I know we've put some policies in place later that we can measure some of those more like qualitative things, but that's the only thing when I read through this, I'm like, oh, I hate standardized tests. And as somebody who struggled with them, I'm like, why am I measured by that? But I also understand it's the nature of the beast of education. So that's my only.
I think that's a good point, and I think it's something that's worth raising. I also think when we're looking at, are the indicators reasonable as presented? I think that they, are reasonable as presented. And I also think that this falls into the capacity building. And as we go through, I think this process over the years, I think there's going to be different opportunities for the qualitative measures to be built in. But at this point, when we're starting fresh work for us from the board level, utilizing the measures that are actually in existence rather than creating might be a wise and relevant point. But I standardized tests are not my favorite either.
And I agree with you 100%. I do. When I read this, I was like, oh, at least we're going to get some information, right? If nothing else, especially in year one, we're just going to get information. And so I even appreciate the fact that they weren't like, it wasn't like we're going to move from this percent to this percent. Because I just want to know, like, where are we today, right? But I also realize that some of this stuff we're trying to figure out where we are today. I just know as a board, we're like, give us where we are so we can fix it. But we gotta start somewhere.
I think that's a good point. I appreciate that. And I think it'll be exciting to see this work evolve over the next years of process. Board, if you wouldn't mind hitting the hand emoji, I'm going to try and kind of keep this in some order if I can actually see hand emojis on the screens.
Meredith,
Okay.
really quick, just last thing. I know that one of the pieces of this, Dr. Clarity, I'm not sure if anybody on your team is taking notes, but I know part of the results piece is for the board to take notes. I do want a note that indicates that we're watching those bands, but it's not necessarily the individual student. I just want us to remember that when we come back and have this discussion in a year, that sometimes data doesn't always say exactly what you're thinking, isn't interpreted exactly the way that it appears. So I just want to make a note of that. Thanks, Meredith.
Thank you. Okay, John, I see your hand up.
Yeah. So sorry, my question pertains to the interpretation, or my thoughts pertain to the interpretation. I agree that the indicators seem reasonable as a starting point. Also not a fan of relying solely on standardized testing, but I get the need to benchmark and start somewhere. As I indicated in the previous round of questioning, I'm really maybe not comfortable with this assumption around this. It's not an assumption. I get that it's not intentional, but the language is written. You know, this is a language arts thing, and it indicates that other content areas are more complex. And that really chafes with me. I don't know that that's reasonable. I liked the suggestion they made around saying different texts. That being said, I think that a lot of people that teach language arts and teach teachers to teach language arts would say that focusing on texts is a bit dated. And we should be thinking about interpreting multiple modes of communication, not just textual. So those are some of the struggles I have with the interpretation there. None of them are like to say that it's out and out unreasonable. I just those are some of my sticking points there. Yeah, I'll be done with that.
Thanks, John. Is there anyone else who wants to weigh in on the interpretation part? And again, we're looking at, is it reasonable? We're not looking at perfection or board preference, but we are looking at, does this reasonably capture what the board's purpose was in writing the policy?
I put my hand back up, Meredith, but it's more so to get clarity from John. I'm not sure if that is where we are, but I'm curious, John, as to what you're thinking. I believe I get where you're going with so I get the more complex text and maybe steering away from just text, maybe, but I'm trying to understand from your vantage point what's missing.
Sure. So when we're talking about language arts, usually you're talking about learning to comprehend and express in forms that are both textual as well as audio or visual. So when I say multimodal, I'm talking about training students to be like able to interpret a movie, like a film study course, as well as just read a book. Or I'm talking about, students who are able to like integrate into graphic design courses as a form of that. Again, it's not unreasonable to say texts there, but a more kind of inclusive term would be to talk about kind of that multimodal framework. And also in terms of inclusiveness, when we first had this discussion and I raised some issues around, whether or not these definitions are going to be inclusive enough for all of our students. I would again think about language instead of like read and write, saying things like comprehend and express, because read and write is very textually based. And again, language arts does more than that. So again, these are my own personal hangups that I'm bringing to the table, but it's not to say that this is unreasonable.
Okay, is there anyone else that has comments that they would like to weigh in on for the interpretation? And if you guys have already had your hands up and your questions answered, will you take the emoji down? Because otherwise I think that I know it's a lot of button pushing when we're virtual, I apologize. Okay, so we can kind of take those under consideration. If we want to move on to are there any questions with the interpretation of terms, the indicators that are listed, the definition of terms, or the education terms? Are all those fairly clear and understandable? And if so, we can move on to evaluating the indicators.
Meredith, I would just reiterate what I said in the definition of terms, that I think we need to be careful and make sure our community, I think we need TWE to be the program that it is, the Spanish and English, and then maybe there needs to be a separate line for like the dual immersion Mandarin program or something like that to delineate.
As far as the definition, a separate definition?
I think they need to be separate because we also don't right now, as we admit, have an indicator yet for the Mandarin assessments. So keeping them, those terms, decoupling them is, I think, appropriate.
Dr. Clarity, do you have any thoughts on that? Is that something that you want us to make a formal amendment to and then vote on? Or is that something that the team agrees should be just a friendly amendment that is not a formal amendment for modification?
We'll happily accept the lesser of the two, a non-formal amendment.
A non-formal amendment. I'm not sure. Yes, just a friendly
amendment.
Yes. Okay. I think that makes sense. And so we will, we can kind of put a pin in that and leave that with the team to formulate the correct language that encapsulates those differences. Is that acceptable to the board informally?
Right, we will we can have that. It'll be adjusted, Dr. Hawkins, a reasonable Wednesday morning?
Yes, absolutely.
Copy, thank you.
Okay, team, let's take a look at the indicators as we move forward. And again, I think it is really important to keep Dr. Clarity's note in mind. This is, first of all, new work. This is a time that we need to have some capacity building, and this is setting us up on a path of doing work that we as a board have never done before. So we do need to start at a reasonable place. We may have ideas that there would be better things that we would personally like to see, but again, we're looking at, is this reasonable, and will this help us determine in a year if reasonable progress towards our goals have been made? We can certainly look at, and we will be looking at, modifying any of the short-term indicators. That'll be Dr. Clarity's team's work next year when they bring the results to us. But as we are looking at these right now as a baseline starting point for measuring results, do we believe that these indicators are reasonable and that they will help us measure whether or not reasonable progress has been made?
The only question I had was on the first grade topic, which we got a great answer for. So I'm good.
That was a great clarification. I appreciate that as well. Jen, I see you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say yes after you were done talking. Yes, period. And the fact that, like with this one too, I think it is important to highlight that the indicators should be quantitative and measurable, which they clearly are as well. So reasonable, measurable, quantitative. I mean, right? I appreciate, especially with an education background, that the how that this team wants to go is up to them. And I don't have to have a say in that. I would like you all to try a how so we can work with something and have a place to go. So I appreciate that that is not a space where this conversation goes. So I take your statement, Meredith. I say yes, and I'm muting.
Great feedback, Jen. And I think that's exciting because I will say, as a board member, I'm excited to see how this data comes back to us in a year. And I think it's exciting just to see this is a more comprehensive process than we've engaged in before. So this will be very fun. So any other comments from the board?
I would just say ditto to what Jen said, that basically this is a reasonable starting point, and I have no problem saying that, yes, these indicators are reasonable.
I just have a quick point of clarification. I'm understanding right that these are intended to be more or less short-term indicators to kind of get a baseline and make sure we're moving in a direction. That's the intent.
I think, Joe, that these will be the indicators that we use at least for a year. Some of these may roll over into longer term indicators, and that'll be reevaluated along with the evaluation of data at our step 2 monitoring process that comes up when we see in a year. Whether or not Dr. Clarity's team recommends a change to indicators will be up to them, because I can see where some of these would be potentially multi-year goals. So that'll be up to them. But I think we can look at these as, are these reasonable goals or indicators for us to determine whether or not progress has been made in the next year when we monitor. That's how I'm viewing it. Dr. Clarity, am I misrepresenting that?
No, that's exactly right. Thank you for that clarification. It's a good question, Joe. Do you have an add-on to that?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I worry a little bit about using a standard of percentage increase, that over time that's going to be harder and harder to attain. So that's setting up for failure. But as a short term, especially for gathering baseline, that's absolutely reasonable and the right way to go.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Joe. I mean, eventually, once we hit 100% perfection, well, we just can't go anywhere but up. But that may not happen by next year. So, so I think this is a good starting point. But I do think that that's a valid point, and that'll be addressed when the team comes back with any revisions to indicators.
Yeah, there's an example of that scenario playing out in chapter 5, and I think they used a desirable. Of course, every district wants 100% graduation rate, and you hit there is no where to go from there. So that is again an example where in the indicators, or maybe graduation rate is no longer the indicator at all because you've hit that level of perfection or proficiency at 100% with nowhere else to go. So again, that's where we will come before the team, reflect based off, there's, we're actually, it's both ways, Joe, because it's not just it becomes unattainable. If we find that we set a goal that was just too easy, we need to adjust that as well. Because that's, we want to challenge. If we're going to say world-class education, we need to put challenging goals and indicators out there.
Great question.
Go ahead, Meredith. Sorry.
No, I was actually just going to call on you. So I saw your hand up.
Dr. Clarity, I think you clarified the question that I had as well. I can't remember exactly. I know that in our OE reporting, it's a year because it's different than this. With results, are you able to come back in August and say like, hey, we have something and we want to revise our interpretations, or do we have to wait a full year? I'm not sure if this is like results that you could potentially get before, what is this, January of next year? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, there are some opportunities, especially with STAR. That's a 3-time-a-year assessment to give us examples of incremental growth. And when you're talking about utilizing data to impact student outcomes, we're going to want to measure that as well, because if we're noticing that we have a population of students, or we're not making the growth that we anticipate, we want to work with our educators around some instructional strategies that may look different. So that will be reported to the board as well. So I think when we're looking at formative or assessments that can be used formative in nature, that does give us opportunity for more frequent feedback to the board in the form of updates. And so long way to say it doesn't always have to be a year.
Okay.
That it's important to note that there may be like updates to the board. The formal monitoring process will be something that we put on our work calendar, and typically is a year, so we can, gauge actual progress over a period of time that's substantial. But I do hope that we get updates, as appropriate. And I think when we, if we remember when we did our work calendar originally, a lot of the work when we were scheduling our monitoring and results was based on some of the cycles of information that we are historically gathering, and some of the assessment schedules. But any good results, we would love to hear anytime. So we certainly won't make you wait a year to come back and report. But a formal report, yeah, a year. Any other board member comments, questions, or concerns? Because I'm seeing a lot of no hand emojis, and that means that I'm thinking that we might be ready to move to a vote on the reasonableness of the interpretation indicators as presented. And if that is the case, I think since we are virtual, it's hard to, I'm going to go through a roll call vote just to make sure if we have those in favor. If we can go through roll call vote, Jen.
So I say yes, yay.
Yeah, sure.
Thumbs up.
Are you in favor of approving the indicators as interpretation and indicators as presented?
Then yes.
Christina.
Yes, with the friendly amendment that we discussed in the definition of terms, yes.
Joe.
Yes.
John.
No, I like the indicators as a starting point. I can't get over my problems with the interpretation.
Okay, Nicole.
Aye.
And Yana.
Aye.
And I also vote to approve the indicators and interpretation as presented, and they have passed. So thank you very much to, first of all, to Dr. Clarity and Ms. Stocks Glover and Ms. Romero Johnson and Dr. Hawkins for all of the work that you have put into our first results policy to make this such a smooth process. Again, I'm very impressed to see all of the different indicators laid out and look forward to hearing the results as they are monitored over the course of time. So thank you for your work. And board, I want to thank you for your flexibility in engaging in this process virtually and being fully prepared to do so in an unusual format, but thank you for your engagement on this. So with that said, we have finished up with the board action portion of the night, and we do have a few public comments. And I think a lot of these comments have probably been addressed earlier in the evening, but I will go ahead and read the comments that we've had submitted virtually. We have 3 of them tonight. Diane Viger writes, help me understand why you're expecting students and staff to be present in the building when Omicron is exploding, yet as a board, you have decided not to meet in person. And usually we don't comment on our public comments, but I think this is a valid question and hopefully one that was addressed satisfactorily at the beginning of the meeting, that this was a practical decision rather than a personal choice or a preferential choice. Laura Olson Dugan writes, Dear VASD, I want to commend VASD's administration, teachers, staff, students, and parents on navigating the pandemic and balancing all needs. I have concerns about the exponentially rising case counts at VAHS. I realize there are no perfect solutions, yet I want to express concern. I'd love to say more here, but 250 words does not give me much space. Feel free to call, and then she provides her phone number, and I will pass that on to Dr. Clarity if there's any follow-up that is needed. Autumn Nero writes, there have been 118 new COVID cases at the high school in 7 days. That's a staggering amount and well above the levels in the community in general. The bottom line is that level isn't safe for the kids, staff, or community. What changes do you intend to make to address this situation? Great comments from the public, and hopefully that our presentations earlier in the meeting have addressed many of these concerns, and I appreciate our community staying involved and concerned about the well-being of our students, staff, and community members as we move forward. That is it for public comment. The next item on our agenda is the superintendent's consent agenda. Has everyone had a chance to review? Are there any questions? Hearing none. This is kind of a speak or raise your hand emoji or forever hold your peace. The superintendent's consent agenda has been approved. We also have the board consent agenda. Has everyone had a chance to review? If there's any questions or concerns, let me know. Hearing none, the board's consent agenda has also been approved. Future agenda items, Our next meeting date, January 24th, February 7th, February 21st, and March 7th. Again, we will be back in person January 24th. So I just want to make sure, again, this was just a one-time accommodation that was necessary. And hopefully I will get to see all of your happy faces in person at our next board meeting.
Hey, Meredith.
Yes.
I just want to say that I may be running late for our meeting on January 24th. I have interviews that run until 6, but I'm going to try to squeeze out to make it on time. But since it's in person, I may be a few minutes late, but I will also keep you posted.
Sounds good. If anything comes up, yep, just keep me posted. I also want to make note of the fact that the WASB conference is next weekend or next week. And I believe it is Wednesday through Friday, with the delegates also attending on Tuesday. There is an in-person option as well as a virtual option. And if there's anyone who is still interested in attending, either virtually or in person, who has not yet indicated so to Rhiannon, please do so. I think we might be getting close to the deadline for registration.
President Christensen, if you do choose the in-person option, please go on and look at the very strict vaccination and testing requirements to do an in-person at times. And it also does require downloading an app that you would need to demonstrate your materials with.
Thank you for pointing that out. That is really important. I don't want anyone to get there and not be fully prepared. So thank you, Dr. Clarity, for pointing that out.
Ask one point of clarity. So is the virtual option like Zoom, or is it recorded sessions that you can access anytime? Or does anyone know that yet? Because last time I checked, I thought it was just recordings.
I don't know. I know for the delegates, there is a Zoom option, so they're able to vote and interact, but I don't know what the virtual option for the rest of the conference is at this point. And I do think that there have been some modifications that have been ongoing. So we'll keep checking your emails and check the WASB site. Again, things are in a bit of flux right now, so we'll all just be as flexible as possible. And in the vein of flexibility, I'm going to ask that we forego our board debrief. I think it's an important agenda item, but I also am looking at all of our administrators who are, again, pulling incredibly late hours and really deserve to get out of here without hearing us talk about how we handled a meeting. I think this time could be best used by extending our extraordinary gratitude to our administrators, and hope please pass that on to the building staff. We are very grateful for all of the work that you're doing, and the fact that you're continuing to do business as usual with these results policies in the midst of everything else going on is nothing short of extraordinary. And I know I speak on behalf of the entire board when I say how much I appreciate everything that you're doing for our students, and how much time that you are putting in. And with that said, I would like you to not put in a moment's longer tonight. So if we can call this meeting to adjourn with this meeting, that would be great. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
Hey, Meredith, just sorry, quickly before you do that, just on the list of meetings, there is not a mention of our retreat that was canceled.
Yes, we'll finalize that and send that and get that updated as soon as possible.
As long as it's by next meeting, it's okay that it's in February. Okay.
Oh, yeah,
okay.
It absolutely is. Yeah, 24 hours notice. Okay, do I have a motion?
And I move to adjourn the meeting.
Perfect. I have a motion from Nicole. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
A second from Christina. Okay, motion to adjourn from Nicole, a second from Christina. All in favor, please signify with aye.
Aye.
This meeting is officially adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again for your flexibility, and good night, administrators. Please do not think about school-related things for at least 8 hours.